See, there we go. Okay.
All right. Well, perfect. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is the first kind of real presentation and webinar we're giving around our Designing Hybrid Engagement Guide, which is a new resource that kind of came about from a few sessions we did last year with the APA Community Engagement Interest Group. Kelly and I are both co-chairs of the interest group. It started back up at the beginning of last year. We had a couple of great conversations and great web meetings, a web meeting, and then also some conference sessions around hybrid engagement. And the thing that really struck us was that even though today hybrid engagement seems to be everywhere, and coming out of COVID seems to be something that everybody sort of accepts as something that we need to do now to reach more people and reach them where they are. It still often is assumed to be room plus Zoom. So the setting of we have a meeting somewhere and we're going to set up a camera and live stream it, and that's sort of oftentimes how it happens and what is sort of assumed to be good practice. And we found in those conversations and in our own work that that's just not the case, that there's a lot more flavors of hybrid engagement and different ways and things you can achieve with it. And so this is really sort of was the driving force behind putting some of those things that we learned, getting some of the insights we heard from people in those sessions and through our own work into a guide. And so this guide is being finalized as we speak and is available. We'll share the resources and the links to it here in just a second. But yeah, that's what the session is about. This is a Konveio sponsored webinar. I'm Chris Haller, the founder of Konveio. We collaborate quite a bit with Kelly Hickler. It's Innovation Studio. She does community engagement design and helping people implement their community engagement plans. So she'll speak a little bit about that and her experience. But yeah, we're going to focus first. Kelly's going to kick us off with a bit of an intro in terms of the sort of framework that we've sort of discovered as part of this work. And then I'll do a little bit of the practical side at the end and kind of showcase a little bit how Konveio can help with all that. So with that, did I forget anything, Kelly? We are recording this, just sort of housekeeping. We're going to share this if anybody wants access to it. You'll also have some other opportunities in the future to catch these more on this. And we have some webinars coming up with Community Engagement Interest Group. But yeah, so with that, I'll turn it over to Kelly.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Okay, I need to move my screen over. Let me see. Is it still sharing or did it go away?
No, you're still sharing. We can see the canvas frame now.
Oh, okay, let me figure out this present mode. There we go. Okay,
Perfect.
I think I did it.
Yep, we're good.
I had it on my wrong monitor and I don't want to be looking this way. I want to look at everyone.
All right.
So, yeah, Chris, did you already mention this? This guide, it's online, it's available at designinghybridengagement.com, and the version that's on there is our kind of pre-release version still. Did you already say that? Am I repeating
No,
you? No.
go ahead.
Okay. I think I was paying attention. Um, so if you did already download it or you want to go on there and download it, just keep in mind that we are going to be making some edits to it. We have received some feedback on it, and you have a little bit of time if you want to make any comments like tomorrow, basically, because next week we're going to be updating it so we can take the full updated version to the National APA conference. So that was just a side note to mention there. But basically, I'm just reiterating what Chris already said. What the problem was and why we created this guide is that we found most people are already doing hybrid engagement, especially since we all lived through the pandemic. What's missing, though, is a clear strategy about how it all works together. It a lot of times ends up being kind of this ad hoc thing where it's like, oh, well, let's throw in a Zoom meeting here and we'll throw in an online survey here and oh, let's have a pop-up at the farmer's market, but there's no clear strategy of how it all goes together. And then at the end of it, when you're trying to consolidate everything and explain to your decision makers, here's what we heard and here's what we did with it. It's like, oh, that it feels a bit messy and hard to explain. So this guide is our attempt to give you a strategy for how all the moving pieces go together more holistically, so you have greater clarity about what exactly you're doing and why. So here it is. This is the graphic that's on the cover. Um, the big takeaway here is that, so we present these four quadrants of hybrid engagement. That's what the Qs stand for. And the big takeaway is that no one of them is better than the others. That's why we use this puzzle graphic to show they all work together. And it's really a holistic system is the best way to think about it. So on our grid here, you can see quadrant 1 and quadrant 3 are in-person methods. Quadrant 2, quadrant 4 online methods. That's pretty self-explanatory, in-person, online. Then quadrant 1 and 2 are synchronous, just meaning they happen at the same time. And then quadrant 3, quadrant 4 are asynchronous, which don't necessarily have to happen at the same time. You can do them at your own leisure. So I'm going to go through each one of these in more detail. Before I get to that, there's some icons that we assigned to each of them that just are considering some of the different, that each of the quadrants have different strengths, and we call them trade-offs. They're not weaknesses, it's just trade-offs between the different methods. So we have three icons here to get you thinking about time. Some of them have greater flexibility of time than others, the place flexibility, and then connection. So if you're having greater time and place flexibility, well, you might lose some opportunity to create connection, which typically happens more so in an in-person setting. Not always, but just some considerations when you're selecting your methods and thinking through the quadrants. Another reason that we did this is and why it's important to have a well thought out strategy is that it's going to help you make your engagement more equitable and effective. So thinking through all the different types of residents, stakeholders, different audience members, participants you would have, and really thinking through what their needs are, what their limitations are, what's their caregiving responsibilities, their mobility limitations, do they work night shift, etc. All right, so we get right into the quadrants here. So quadrant 1 is the in-person synchronous. This is your typical, in-person meeting, whether that's an open house, a workshop, a town hall meeting. Um, it could be a smaller, like working group meeting or focus group, etc. And those typically work best when you need to have a lot of interaction between people. When you want to have a dialogue, like people sitting around a table having a dialogue together, typically works better in person. It helps when people meet each other in person to build those relationships and build trust. Um, a lot of times you might want to do it just for optics. Like if you're having a big kickoff event or you want to have something that is feels substantial, well, you might want to do that then too. And I realize that this is like a mortal sin that I have committed here by putting this very small font on, on the slide. And that I just copied and pasted everything from the guide into here. And I'll clean that up later, but all of this information is in the guide. Don't worry, I'm not going to read all of it word for word to you. I just wanted to have it available to look at. So we go through for each of the quadrants, we go through the strengths, the limitations of those, and some key design considerations. So, like I just said already, strengths of this first quadrant are building deeper connection, creating opportunities for better dialogue. If you want to do hands-on type activities like some model building or a walking tour or something, well, you have to do that in person. Obviously, the constraints are, well, it happens at a specific time at a specific place. So you're going to be limiting who can come to that. If they're working a night shift, if they are a single parent, if they have mobility concerns. It can also be highly resource intensive in terms of like, materials and poster boards and how many team members do you need to have facilitating table conversations, etc. So these tend to be higher cost items or methods. Okay, quadrant two then is this is like, so if you think of quadrant one is the room, then quadrant two is the Zoom, part of the room plus Zoom. So if you're having an in-person meeting and you want to enable people to attend via Zoom or some other online method. This happened very commonly during COVID, of course, where hey, we can't have the city council meeting in person, so we'll have it on Zoom. So a lot of cities are still doing this, just adding a Zoom component. And obviously that does make it easier for people who can't physically be there in person for whatever reason to still feel like they're participating. Um, I know here I'm going to go to the next slide already because I'm talking about the strengths and limitations of this. Chris and I were talking to, now I don't remember what city they were from. Maybe it'll come to me. How it was two team members that participated in the same meeting. One was in person and the other was on
Arlington, yeah.
Zoom.
City of
Yeah,
Arlington, yeah.
Arlington, that's what it was. Yeah, and they had totally different experiences of the same meeting. So I thought, well, that's interesting to know that that's one of the limitations that what's happening, it's not always possible to capture what's happening live in the room and translate that, whether you're doing Zoom or what is it called? Owl,
Yeah.
yeah,
Camera that
the
follows you.
owl, the camera that follows you around. There's different technology you can use, but it's still not possible to completely replicate the experience. And quadrant three, these would be like your pop-up at a farmer's market, or if you do, some cities that do these like city meeting in a box kits, or you could have, so like a pop-up at a farmer's market would be a staffed thing typically, but you could have just a board or something that you put up at a library or community center, etc. I don't know if you guys have seen this activity. The picture is not big enough. If I could zoom in and you could read it, it says, "I wish this place was," and there are stickers so people could write what they wish that place was. So these are your in-person activities. I These kind of excite me the most because you can get really creative with this stuff. Um, And then people can do it at their own leisure, which is nice too, but it's trick they don't tend to create a lot of opportunities for interaction among people among the participants. And these are kind of the hard things to consolidate at the end when you're trying to consolidate all the comments. Like, well, what do I do with these stickers? Or what do I do with and Chris is going to talk about this later on of what do you do with all the sticky dots? Okay, I already talked about strengths and limitations of that one. And then quadrant four, this would be your online component. If you're a lot of cities will have a project website that has FAQs, etc., information about the project. You could have your online surveys. I'll do a plug for Konveio. Konveio is an example of of an online engagement platform. Um, so this is the lowest barrier method for getting people to participate. Um, and there are opportunities, I'll go to this one. There are opportunities for people to interact with each other, like respond to each other's comments, etc. Um, some of the limitations of this, though, can be if someone is not comfortable using that technology, it might be intimidating or overwhelming. They're like, I just want to write on a sticky note, or I just want to send an email or whatever, then this might feel exclusionary. Yeah, exclusive is different, exclusionary to them. So those are just a few of the different considerations. Of course, there's a lot more details. I just want to give you a high level overview of some of the considerations with each of these quadrants and starting to think through how they can all go together. So quickly, I wanted to touch on design principles when you're thinking about hybrid engagement, that of course you want to always clarify your purpose. Why are you doing this? And what is the level? We talk in the guide about IAP2. If you're familiar with IAP2, we use that scale in there. Um, of course, we're prioritizing inclusion and accessibility, designing with realistic capacity. There's all sorts of cool ideas that you can do, but are they realistic for your budget, for your schedule, for your team? Are they realistic to do? Always communicating clearly in the methods that people prefer, thinking about how to design for continuity and follow through, closing the loop on your communication and telling people how you use their input. And then this last one that I think maybe is actually the most important. I might rearrange the order of this, Chris, and put this one first
Yeah.
next time. But designing for synthesis from the start, which I worked on so many projects where you have all these components, where you have in-person meetings and pop-ups and online surveys, and you end up with like post-it notes and emails and all this input. You go, oh my gosh, what do we do with this? How do we consolidate all of this in a meaningful way in order to make decisions and share it with our decision makers? So that is why it's very important to think about that right from the start. And then this is basically what I do, and this is what I help my clients with, is planning for their hybrid engagement, identifying your audience, choosing how to communicate, choosing your methods. I can help you do an engagement methods inventory of um, your organization, figuring out how you're going to measure success, and then closing that loop and hopefully building some real relationships with people throughout the process. And I think that that's my last slide, and this is where I turn it over to you, Chris.
All right.
Yep.
Okay. I'm gonna stop share. Right. All right. Here we go. All right. Thanks, Kelly. That was great. And great sort of to have that framework. So now from there, we're going to move a little bit into the practical side of things and looking at how some of those combinations of different quadrants shape up in your different phases of your project, maybe in different contexts, right? And so like Kelly mentioned, sort of combining that in-person and online quadrants has the benefit of bridging some of those strengths, right? So you can have a trust building activity in person and then still continuing that online or other combinations of it. So looking for those opportunities is really sort of what we were trying to tease out here. And with that, sort of removing some of the constraints, maybe on time, maybe on being in a certain place at a certain time, et cetera, right? And so first one, obviously the big one. This is sort of the most common combination that we sort of label as room plus Zoom. It's having an in-person meeting, extending it online, either at the same time with a there's another flavor of that, which is sort of having satellite meetings. So people that can't make it to the main location can maybe participate in other areas, more of a regional effort, maybe. All of those, the key here, especially if you do the Zoom combination, is they appear to be easy, right? You have a Zoom or Microsoft Teams subscription, so why not add it? It does have the strength then to say, okay, if you can't make it to a specific location to participate, we're including people that, have problem with transportation. There's some accessibility issues, maybe why they can't make it. They couldn't get a babysitter, whatever the reasons are, right? And so great from that perspective. So as you can tell, by our little coding here, it kind of adds that location independence to it. It still requires people to be in the same place if you do that. Well, no, sorry. Same time. You still need to make it there on Tuesday at 6 at night, right? And if you can't, then you're sort of missing out unless they're kind of spaced. So that's definitely a drawback. But the other big one, well, there's sort of other considerations to it, right? And Kelly already mentioned one of them being, I think all of you have probably been in a meeting where part of the group is in person, and then if you're participating in Zoom, it can feel like a second-class citizen. As in you don't have that same experience, you don't get heard, there's just enough of a lag to kind of for it to be difficult. And so that's really something that then requires a lot of planning around, right? So there's ways to get around. We're not going to go into too much detail, and there's great resources around that, right? You might have a separate facilitator or like a chat advocate that looks at the chat comments and brings those into the main meeting. Maybe if the main meeting has roundtable discussions, you sort of try to do breakout groups and have some additional facilitators in the room so that happens similarly. There's other strategies like using technology. So I'm sure many of you have used Mentimeter. So you could use, for example, mobile phone polling and have people participate in the same poll online as well as when they're in a meeting. And then the benefit is you have the results show up from everybody with the exclusive results. So that said, there are ways to get around that and to make sure that it feels sort of as equal participants both in person and online. It's just requires a lot more prep work, potentially a lot more staff, sort of other things like that. And then there's obviously sort of the issue with anything real time. And if you add technology has a tendency to occasionally fail. And so a real-time failure and breakdown of technology sort of adds a whole nother sort of level of excitement to that. So I'm going to leave it at that. As I said, there's a ton of sort of good documentation around that. Also sort of one of the more common things we see. The other part, and this is something we see fairly frequently with our clients at Konveio, is this combination of Q1 and Q4. So starting something in person with the benefit of having that connection, of having that milestone that Kelly mentioned, right? You want to have maybe a big kickoff, and that, works better in person. But then not everybody can make it, and especially if those meetings are maybe charrettes or open houses with presentation boards around the room, those are great opportunities to extend them online for a period of time afterwards. So this would be kickoff meeting on Tuesday night at 6, and then, for the next 2 weeks, go to this online address and participate, potentially with the same kind of materials that you were using in person. And I think that's oftentimes where the challenge is, right? There are a lot of tools, especially if you use just a survey tool or sort of discussion-based engagement tool. It's really hard to translate those materials that you used in person to the online experience. And that's kind of one of the things that we at Konveio have recently, and then for the last couple of years, really sort of tried to hone in on. So this is a project with the city of Denver. They had, neighborhood meetings with presentation boards for a neighborhood plan. They happened, one meeting per neighborhood, which was somewhat limited, right? And so to extend that, they used Konveio to extend the participation, bringing those same boards into the online experience. And so you can then, as an online participant, still kind of look at the same dot voting exercise. You can still click and add your sticky notes, sort of like you would in person, using a sticky note and write down your comment. You can do that using our commenting interface. And then same thing for the mapping, right? So you have those large maps in a public workshop. You can kind of talk to staff, kind of write down your notes on maybe where, affordable housing should go, where parking should be, and where, challenging intersections are. And so bringing that same Esri map into Konveio is a simple kind of just pasting the link. And so let's take a look at that real quick, just to kind of give you a sense of how that works. So the dot voting is actually a fairly new feature. It allows you to add these little boxes here in the different areas where you collect dots in the workshop. People can add and click on the box to add their comments. It's all tied back to the user, so cheating is much harder than in person, where you can just sort of add many dots to it. And you get sort of the immediate tally and kind of get a sense of how everybody else is thinking about certain aspects. And then it still has the opportunity to add, specific comments maybe into another box using the comment interface in Konveio. So that's sort of one part of, the toolkit that we often see used, especially in open houses. The other part is, like I said, the map. Obviously, bringing the map inside Konveio allows you to sort of simply click and comment on a schematic map or, a CAD rendering or design options. However, Konveio does have a ArcGIS integration, so you can take those ArcGIS layers and plug them right into that experience, and then people can add comments or, look at other people's comments and, also explore the map. So gonna leave it at that. Typically, this is sort of early to middle stages of a planning process, right? The workshop at the end for reviewing your final draft looks slightly different, and it's something that Konveio has been also supporting for a long time. Typically also sort of more on the involved to collaborate level when you look at the IEP2 scheme engagement kind of framework. And so I want to highlight another combination. This gets more elaborate. This is a project in the city of Sacramento that I'm going to show you in a second, but they tried to do like all three, right? So they tried to combine, they didn't try to have a live online and in person. So this is slightly different, where they did have a kickoff event in person, and then had a couple of workshops after using Zoom for people that couldn't make it in person but still wanted that guided experience, but then used Konveio in sort of this extended fashion to bring those same materials to people online. And what was interesting about it, in combining those three, again, they had sort of the best of the, trying to gain all the strengths across sort of those different quadrants. And including really sort of pushing the boundary a little bit and using even QR codes here to collect feedback digitally in the in-person workshops. And same for the hosted workshops on Zoom. They still use Konveio to then provide their presentation boards that way, so people could explore those, but come back to have questions, right? Sort of replicating that similar experience where you have a planner in the room who can answer questions and explain things, but at the same time, it's a somewhat self-guided experience. We can walk around and sort of just read and learn at your own time. So this is what that looked like. It used Konveio's landing page builder to kind of give you sort of the agenda, which is a very flexible structure to bring together an agenda of a planning workshop. You can sort of replicate what you do in person, right? You have an intake station or a form people fill out in the beginning. And again, that was sort of that guided experience. Like during sign up, they actually had people fill out the online form instead of using pen and paper kind of version. And then just like in the room, you can kind of choose your own adventure, if you will, and say, well, I'm really interested in low cost housing. So I'm going to go straight to station 2, learn more about that, again, using those same materials, add my comments, kind of read what others have been saying, and then continue my journey, including giving some sort of final feedback at the end. So it's really that mix and match that helps with all kinds of different structures, and replicating different workshop structures. Because honestly, like when we look at sort of what our clients do, the workshops have very different kind of structures, right? And I'm sure when you look at your own work, you find that one workshop, not just by different client, but also by different topic and by different phase of the project, they vary quite significantly, right? And so then they advertised here the options to join a Zoom meeting if you're in this self-guided experience, but want some assistance, and then, gave an outlook. So continuing on, one more combination I want to highlight is this sort of both, like the two sort of asynchronous quadrants combined. And as Kelly mentioned, that's sort of typically something you would use when engagement happens at a specific location. So we see this at, like for development, new developments, where you want to get some feedback on what is being developed. I think this could be a trails master plan where you want to learn from people how they're using a trail. It's a trailhead. Same for parks, park updates, and design projects, things like that, where you want to reach people, specifically sort of users of certain amenities, and interact with them. And so, that can be, and oftentimes now is, a combination of either fill out maybe a postcard or like a small flyer, and then extend that, using sort of maybe an online survey or, other online tool to hear from them. And so it's hard. I mean, this is very heavy on the, one earlier side of a project. It's definitely not as in depth. You don't meet people in person, so there's no connection building maybe that you would have in a workshop. Still sort of, actually, I don't even know if we should have flagged the location, because technically oftentimes these are tied to a location. You can participate and fill it out from anywhere. You could take it back on the bus with you and then fill out the rest of the survey while you're on the bus, but still often tied to a specific place. Yeah, and so, as you can expect, or as you would expect, Konveio does have a few kind of ways of helping with that. We obviously have sort of a sticky note tool, so you can add, that's sort of where do we want to be in 2040, kind of big picture conversations. What do you want this park to look like? The image wall is another kind of idea here to say, okay, we're looking at a park redesign. What kind of elements do you want to see here? Kind of upload some pictures and give us some inspiration. Or it's a simple, right? This is more of the trails kind of plan of saying, okay, here's our trail system. No, sorry, this is a different kind of map, more complicated map from a local plan in the UK, but you get the idea. You show some sort of underlying conditions and people can comment on those. So yeah, this is very early stage, typically more sort of lower level participation, less sort of influence. And I'm going to finish on that. Oh, sorry. I'm going to go back. Sorry. Oh, actually, there you go. Um, the there are other combinations, right? You can combine the quadrants in other ways. There are less common. There's rarely like it doesn't really make sense to combine Q1 and Q3 we found. I don't think I've ever seen an example of that. Same for sort of just online is oftentimes, well, I think we see that more in sort of stakeholder collaboration, right? You have certain work groups, at least that's sort of from a Konveio perspective, often what we see, we have like, again, a feature where you can kind of lock a certain part of the page to just sort of citizen advisory committee or something like that. And they might meet once a month, maybe on Zoom because they can't get into the same place and they'll be asking maybe too much of them. So you could do that small group collaboration in Zoom and then in between meetings use online collaboration to maybe advance certain, certain topics or certain drafts you're working on. So I do think there's a use for Q2 and Q4, but it's probably not big enough in this context to sort of highlight separately. This is what we kind of left it out. So a couple of big takeaways before we wrap up here. If you're using a hybrid strategy, right, I think oftentimes, unfortunately, that does double or triple the planning and prep work that goes into it, especially if you plan something that includes live meetings being live streamed. We kind of mentioned earlier, it requires more staffing, it requires more testing, it requires more support. So keep that in mind. As Kelly kind of pointed out early on, equal participation requires intentional design. That goes back to sort of the second-class citizen idea of, if you're sitting through a Zoom meeting and you see everybody in the meeting having fun and looking at a graphic, I think that was the Arlington example. They had a graphic facilitator kind of capture the conversation, and online you couldn't see what they're actually capturing. And so people were referring to that, but online you had no idea what they're talking about. So again, doing that requires a different kind of setup with maybe additional facilitators to kind of help with, bringing their voices into the main room, making sure they can see things that are happening in the main room, etc. Technologies should serve, not shape the engagement, right? That's sort of an obvious one. It's sort of the hammer and nail problem. If all you have is a survey tool, there's a chance you might sort of use that for more than it actually is good for. Same with Zoom. That's not to say you shouldn't use those. I think it just requires, again, other like thinking it through fully to kind of make sure that participation happens in a way that, again, supports the process and is not sort of happening a certain way just because the software works a certain way. And then one size doesn't fit all, right? Like I think that kind of came across with the projects are different. Some projects maybe it's like lend itself more to a certain type of hybrid engagement where others are different, right? That's sort of the example of the trail master plan or something like that, where something that is just asynchronous might actually make sense. Whereas and make sense of one part of the project or process. And so I think that's kind of the part where we obviously need to tailor that to the audience and the purpose and the stage of the process, et cetera. And then the last thing here is like we find peer learning is invaluable. No one has it all figured out. I think that's kind of that was the big takeaway from the work we did with the engagement interest group last year. Everybody's trying different things, has experience with different kind of approaches, kind of exchanging ideas is sort of important. It's how this guide came about. And by no means do we think we have it all figured out. And I think on that note, we want to kind of end here and say, we'd love to hear from you. I do want to, before we jump into Q&A and encourage you to kind of share your experiences, I want to highlight the URL Designing Hybrid Engagement is where you can download the current version of the guide. As Kelly mentioned, we're going to finalize that. So there will be an updated version next week. If you want to get involved, if you're not already part of the community engagement interest group with APA, please join us. It's free. You don't have to be an APA member even. It's a great way to, participate in some webinars, networking at conferences. So we have some events coming up. If you're going to be in Detroit, please join us and reach out if you have any ideas about tools and technology or other sessions you would like to see, etc. And so I'm noticing when we're going to open it up for Q&A, I'm going to fix this so you can see Kelly's email. So this is where you can find us, and you'll soon see her full email address here. But yeah, with that, thank you so much for joining us today. And I really would love to hear, one, your feedback, and then your experiences where you think you've tried certain things that are along what we presented here, or things we were missing, or other kind of ideas. So please unmute yourself and speak up.
Well, I'll always take that offer. This is
Okay.
Ryan, Matau from MIG, and I appreciate this. I think that, the thing that comes to mind every time I start talking about hybrid engagement or digital engagement overall at this point is something that my partner told me about. She works in a digital advertising or digital marketing agency, and she's like, but I don't know why they call it digital marketing because it's all digital. It's like
Yeah.
or it's got to include that. And I think that the hybrid, kind of triggers that same thing in my mind, is like, if we're doing it right, we're doing it in more than one space. And just like you would hope not to be just like putting a sign out there, having a meeting, and that's the end of your community engagement. It's like
Mm.
you're gonna try to do multiple different things. But uh, the couple of things that stood out to me, I think the kind of preparation and I commented in the chat about the double or
Yeah.
triple resources. What we find where a lot of that goes is the preparation to make sure everything goes smooth.
Yeah.
And then the other part of it is you have to duplicate some of the professional resources that you have. Like, you can need to have facilitators online as well as facilitators in the room, and you can need to have people who are just purely running the technology. And I think that that's something, and that can also need to be in the room and online. And
Right.
so I think that those one of the things that I really would emphasize is those connection points between the digital, especially in a live meeting,
Yeah.
those connection points between the digital spaces and the in-person spaces are really critical to making that feel like you're actually interacting with the people who are online, or vice versa.
No, yeah, that's good to hear, and I agree. Like that's the part that requires practice too, is like what those handoffs look like, and to making sure that that all works smoothly, right? It's a production, I guess. And so yeah, good point. And I like your comment in the comments here, is like, yeah, it is more effort, but you have the payoff of reaching a larger audience, right? So if you break it back down to sort of a cost per participant, chances are that, doesn't change that much, or maybe even gets slightly cheaper if you have a larger reach. Yeah, something to keep in mind. I know
I
there's
was
been
gonna
some
say,
comments on,
oh,
go ahead, Kelly. Yeah.
on that same point, I was gonna say, what's the cost of not preparing though? Like, if you're if you don't spend, yeah, okay, maybe it takes more time or cost up front to prepare, but you might pay for it later.
Yeah.
And so, because at some point you have to do something with all your input. So the and that might be in the cost might be time that you have to spend a lot of time then synthesizing everything. So yeah,
Yeah, or
what you
that
were gonna say.
things break down or don't go smoothly in the meeting, right? So I think
Yep,
there's definitely.
yep.
So Courtney, I saw you added something to the discussion about over engagement. And I'm curious if that's more so about um, too many steps and too many projects, where people then, don't realize the city has like three different planning projects going on at the same time and can't differentiate between them anymore, or if this is more about within a project too. I guess tell us a little bit more, maybe
Right.
more context on where you saw that and what you've been sort of doing about it.
Yeah. Hi, Chris. It's good
Hey.
to speak with you again. Just a little background. I was used to be with the City and County in Denver, and I'm with
Oh, great. Yeah.
REI Planning Landscape Architecture, so private consultant side.
Yeah.
We've seen, I think in landscape architecture, we talk about, right tree, right place. And I think
Mhm.
it's right engagement method, right place, and
Mhm.
that we're not over engagement was, asking folks going to the well too often, like Kelly was saying, or engagement fatigue, but also just designing these projects where we're just engaging. The engagement is too much, too long, too often. Um, and really seeing that clients want a more poignant conversation where they don't want the high level, what are your hopes and dreams, but they also don't want them designing a restroom, right?
Yeah,
In a
right,
park.
right.
So it's, you know, figuring out what that sweet spot is and making sure that we're articulating the trade-offs accurately rather than just like having these very robust engagement process that's just too much. And
Yeah.
just getting really accurate with our engagement and getting in and getting out is what we're seeing a lot of our clients
Yeah.
starting to ask for rather than the kitchen sink.
Right, right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that goes into, right? Like, I mean, we're presenting this framework here that allows you to build these sort of very complex processes potentially. But I think part of that is to communicate that in a way where it kind of becomes obvious that there's, what the pieces are and not presenting them something that's overwhelming, right? Because if it takes time to figure out all the different things you could do, that, I think contributes to the fatigue and to the sort of over engagement. So like you said, being clear about what it is you're asking for and what you're engaging around, why you're doing it, and then having some clear steps on how to present or provide that feedback and getting involved, I think is important. So yeah, good point.
I appreciate this. This has been a great informative webinar and always love to see what you guys are doing.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. All right. Do we have anybody else who wants to add some thoughts? Maybe tell us a little bit about what worked, what didn't work, maybe something we missed. As I said, we're still sort of fine-tuning this, so you're early participants in this. So any thoughts on that too? So Ryan, I saw you unmuted yourself.
One thing I would suggest maybe we could call out a little bit more. I just mean we as a collective, community is each you touched on in a few places the ways that different techniques can overcome whether it's accessibility, in some form accessibility concerns. But I really think that the specific considerations for mobility and other disabilities, in each of those, like there's both opportunities and challenges in each of those, for sure. And I think that one of the things that we see a lot of is, adaptive technology works better in digital spaces. It's very hard to provide the adequate adaptive technology for, say, hearing loss and things like that in a public meeting, but when you can be in your own space and you can control things and you can, crank the volume, you can do these other things. You can have captions, you can do a lot of things kind of just with your own, like the familiar technology that you use. And then the other side of it is, of course, there are situations and people who aren't comfortable coming into those public spaces for whatever reason. And we're hearing more and more, especially out of Southern California and other places, that we're not seeing particularly disenfranchised folks showing up because they're concerned about things like immigration raids. They're concerned about their physical safety in a public space, and the opportunity to participate in the same way in the same meeting really opens some doors. We're having some really good luck in a Southeast LA project right now with a lot of really heavily facilitated hybrid meetings that and getting a lot of great voices out of that community that really haven't been involved before. So just wanted to touch on the accessibility part. I think that you guys, I've seen a lot of the steps you've taken to do that, and I think that it's just something that can be emphasized in each of those quadrants a little bit.
No, I agree. And honestly, it's an interesting one, right? Because the dissecting accessibility is important, like you just said, because oftentimes all that kind of is sort of if it's online, it needs to be WCAG compliant, which is true. So right, we're dealing with people that are or preparing for people that are on screen readers, etc. But then the same goes for people in person, right? If you're in a wheelchair, you still need to be able to get into the building. If you can't hear, you need somebody who can interpret for you. So it's different in different contexts and important, but each of those different venues provides different opportunities for different people that have needs in that regard. And so and then actually one thing I wanted to highlight actually with the community engagement interest group, if you're interested in that, we are having a meeting or a webinar coming up with together with the Hispanic and Latino division chapter.
Yeah,
I don't know.
the Latinos in Planning Division.
Yeah, and it's exactly about that. It's sort of the title was sort of a engagement in the ice age, right? Like, what do we do if we have a large part of the population we want to hear from that will not show up in person because they're worried about their safety? And so, yeah, I think that is an important additional aspect of accessibility. So just wanted to highlight that. So if you're interested in that, we have that on our here apacommunityengagement.org website is where you'll find information about that upcoming meeting. So thanks. All right. I think we're getting towards the end. We still have time for one or two more questions or thoughts, but if not, we're happy to wrap up too. Anybody else have anything to add? Going once, going twice. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. As I said, this is sort of early stage for us. We're excited sort of to hear from you, and thanks for providing your feedback and insights. We'll have an updated guide. Some of the things we heard today will kind of probably make their way into that too. And so, yeah, really looking forward to continuing the conversation. And yeah, with that, Kelly, you have anything to add?
No, that was great. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and yeah, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.